When Nazi Germany surrendered in May 1945, the war in Europe was over. But for more than 150 U-boat crews, the war wasn't over. They were still at sea, submerged in the silent darkness of the Atlantic, their radio operators listening to a world that had changed above them. What came next was one of the strangest and most surreal chapters of the Second World War.
Within hours of the surrender, Admiral Karl Donitz, Hitler's brief successor and the architect of the U-boat war, issued his final historic order. All U-boats were to cease operations, surface, and surrender to the nearest Allied authority. The long, brutal war beneath the waves was over. Across the North Atlantic, the Bay of Biscay, and the fjords of Norway, the wolf packs that once haunted Allied shipping lanes began to surface. Imagine the psychological shock for these crews. For years, they were the apex predators of the ocean. Now, they were prey. Ordered to sail into enemy ports, their decks crowded with exhausted men hoisting white flags as Allied aircraft circled menacingly overhead. They sailed to designated ports like Lough Eriboll in Scotland and Lissahalli in Northern Ireland. At Lough Eriboll, witnesses described a grim, silent parade of defeat as nearly 40 U-boats anchored together, their rusted hulls scarred by battle. The surrender process was tightly controlled. Allied boarding parties seized Enigma code machines, charts, and advanced acoustic torpedoes. But as engineers cataloged the vessels, they were stunned by what they found. And this presented the Allies with an immediate, pressing dilemma. What do you do with hundreds of the world's most advanced and deadliest submarines?
The Allies couldn't simply let them rust. Keeping them afloat was costly and dangerous. Scrapping hundreds of complex submarines would take years and resources they didn't have. But there was a darker, more pressing reason for urgency. The Cold War was already beginning. The Soviet Union, now a tenuous ally, was demanding its share of captured German technology. The British and Americans knew they could not risk these advanced weapons falling into Stalin's hands. The solution was drastic and decisive. It was called Operation Deadlight. The plan was simple: tow 116 of the captured U-boats out into the deep Atlantic, roughly 100 miles northwest of Ireland, and sink them, erase them from existence. Between November 1945 and February 1946, the Royal Navy began this quiet, monumental task. But the logistics were a nightmare. This was not a clean operation. Many of the U-boats were in dreadful condition, battered by Allied bombs or deliberately sabotaged by their own crews. They were being towed in the middle of a brutal North Atlantic winter. Their ballast tanks leaked, their engines were seized, and their hulls were weakened by rust. In the stormy seas, these unstable wrecks were incredibly hazardous to tow. As a result, more than a third of the U-boats never even made it to the scuttling zones. 56 of them foundered and sank on the way, dragged down by rough weather or structural failure. The Royal Navy simply recorded their loss and moved on. The purpose was destruction, not preservation. For the boats that did reach the dumping grounds, the Navy finished the job. Destroyers and frigates used them as target practice, blasting them with naval gunfire, rockets, and explosive charges. Among the doomed submarines was U-2336, the very last U-boat to sink Allied ships during the war. It was towed from Lisale and deliberately sunk in January 1946. One by one, Hitler's Wolfpacks plunged to the seabed.
But the Allies didn't sink all of them. They kept the crown jewels. While Operation Deadlight was sinking the older, obsolete models, Allied intelligence teams were carefully preserving the most advanced submarines ever built, the revolutionary Type 21 and Type 23 electro-boots. What they found inside these boats terrified them. The Allies realized they hadn't just won the Battle of the Atlantic, they had won it just in time. The Type 21 was not a submersible, a boat that travels on the surface and briefly hides underwater. It was a true submarine, designed to live, hunt, and fight almost entirely beneath the surface. It was a technological leap of 10 years. First, it had a snorkel. This simple device allowed the submarine to run its diesel engines while submerged at periscope depth, constantly charging its massive battery banks. The older U-boats had to surface to charge, making them vulnerable. The Type 21 never had to. Second, its hydrodynamically streamlined hull and enormous battery capacity allowed it to do something unthinkable. It could travel faster underwater than most Allied warships could track with sonar. It could silently sprint at 17 knots submerged, launch its torpedoes, and vanish before the escorts even knew what hit them. This wasn't theoretical. In the final days of the war, U-2511, one of the only combat-ready Type 21s, went on patrol. It found the British cruiser HMS Norfolk, protected by a screen of destroyers. The U-boat slipped inside the destroyer screen, undetected, conducted a mock torpedo attack, and then slipped away again. The British never even knew it was there. When its commander reported this after surrendering, Allied naval officers were horrified. If these super weapons had been deployed just 6 months earlier, they could have changed the entire course of the war. Now, in 1945, a new arms race was on.
Gentlemen,
The Tripartite Naval Commission was formed to manage the spoils of war. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union each received 10 of the most advanced U-boats for examination and study. The U.S. Navy's interest was particularly intense. They had already captured one U-boat in a dramatic high-seas battle before the surrender. This was U-505, captured in June 1944 by a task force led by Captain Daniel Gallery. Gallery's ships had forced the U-boat to the surface with depth charges. As the German crew bailed out, they set scuttling charges to sink the boat. An American boarding party, led by Albert David, leapt onto the sinking submarine, dodged machine gun fire, and frantically searched in the dark for the demolition charges. They found them with only minutes to spare, disarmed them, and captured the submarine, along with its priceless Enigma machine and codebooks. It was a massive intelligence victory. Now, with access to the entire surrendered fleet, the U.S. Navy put its captured boats under an intense microscope. They were studied at naval facilities in Portsmouth and New London. American engineers reverse-engineered the snorkel systems, the silent running technology, and the advanced hull designs. This stolen technology became the foundation for the U.S. Navy's Greater Underwater Propulsion Power Program, or GUPPY, which retrofitted America's own wartime fleet with German innovations. One of the most mysterious prizes was U-23-4. This long-range cargo submarine was captured on May 14, 1945, after the surrender, while en route to Japan. Its secret payload stunned Allied intelligence. 560 kilograms of uranium oxide, the key ingredient for an atomic bomb. Also on board were advanced jet engine components, acoustic torpedo schematics, and several high-ranking German scientists and Japanese military officers. The implications were chilling. After its secrets were dissected, U-234 was sunk during weapons tests in 1947. Across the Iron Curtain, the Soviets were doing the same. They had captured several Type 21 boats at the shipyards in Danzig. Soviet engineers, with the help of captured German technicians, dissected them plate by plate. The result was the Soviet Whiskey-class submarine, a near-direct copy of the Type 21 that became the backbone of the Soviet submarine fleet. The same German engineering that once hunted Allied convoys was now fueling an arms race beneath the Arctic ice. The U-boats had simply changed masters, but their strategic value remained. By the 1950s, the innovations of the Type 21 had become the design foundation for nearly every conventional submarine built in the world.
While hundreds were scuttled or scrapped, a handful of these steel sharks escaped destruction to become artifacts of remembrance. Today, U-995, a submarine that surrendered in Norway, rests at Lebow, Germany. Visitors can step inside its narrow hull and experience the oppressive, claustrophobic quarters where 45 men lived and fought for weeks at a time. In Chicago, the Museum of Science and Industry displays U-505, the boat so dramatically captured in 1944. It remains a stunning monument to the intelligence battle that raged in the Atlantic. And then there is U-534, mysteriously sunk off the Danish coast in 1945. It was raised from the seabed in 1993. Today, it rests at Birkenhead, England, cut into sections, its secrets exposed for all to see. But the majority of Hitler's U-boats remain where Operation Deadlight sent them. For 6 decades, the wrecks lay forgotten, marked only by coordinates on secret naval charts. Then, between 2001 and 2003, maritime archaeologist Innes McCartney led expeditions that rediscovered this lost fleet. Using sonar, his team identified at least 14 intact U-boat hulls, preserved in the cold, dark Atlantic mud. The sonar images were stunning. Some boats were upright and perfectly preserved. Others showed catastrophic damage from scuttling charges. The evidence confirmed the chaotic, hurried nature of Operation Deadlight, a mission to erase a threat, not to preserve history. They are silent, haunting memorials to the 30,000 German submariners and the countless Allied sailors who never returned from the deep. The final story of the U-boat fleet is one of irony. Sunk by their enemies,
scuttled by their own crews or captured and copied by new superpowers. Today, the preserved boats in museums and the rusting wrecks below the Atlantic serve as twin memorials, one above water, one below, telling the final silent story of an empire of steel that now rests between history and the sea.